So a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all, depending on your time of the day. I'm happy to welcome you to our exclusive virtual event on shaping the future of decentralized trials. I, Vikram Kasbekar, the head of marketing for TCS ADD Life Sciences platform, would be your host and moderator for the day. Today, we are going to talk about how pharma companies like yours can implement the next generation of patient-centric trials, also referred to as decentralized trials. No jargons, no high-level message, and we'll dive right into practicalities, experiences, collaborations, and see examples of successful implementation that can help you adopt decentralized trials initiatives in your organization. And to take us through this journey, next slide, please. Yeah, and to take us through this journey, I would like to invite two industry veterans. Our first speaker, Dr. Hilde Vanaken, joined TCS a year back and acts as an senior industry advisor for TCS Life Sciences and Healthcare. Hilde comes from a pharma background and brings with her more than 25 years of experience in multiple leadership roles across diverse domains. She has a track record of turning large and complex concepts into realizations, demonstrated by her role in founding and leading Janssen's flagship initiative for patient engagement and smart technologies, and also driving TransCellerate's first patient-centric initiative, eConsent, from ideation till realization. Our second speaker, Narayanan Ramaswamy, a Kanaru, as we fondly call him, acts as the chief architect for digital health and drug development platforms at TCS. Naru heads clinical and safety solutions for TCS ADD Life Sciences platform as well as the TCS Connected Clinical Trials platform. Now, before I hand over the mantle to Naru and Hilde, a couple of housekeeping rules. All attendees have by default been placed on mute and thus would not be able to speak into the mic. If you have any questions, you may post your query in the Q&A box provided in the tool. Our speakers will take up the questions once the presentation concludes, which should be roughly 45 minutes from now. If you are yet unable to answer all questions due to paucity of time, we shall email you the responses post our virtual event. This virtual event would be recorded and its recording shall be made available in a few weeks. Now, post the virtual event, there will be a small feedback email with a link embedded to which we would appreciate your valuable inputs on what you liked about the virtual event and what, in your opinion, can be made better. This will help us evolve and enhance our future virtual events and provide you with the best experience. So without further ado, let me hand over the mantle to Naru and Hilde. Over to you guys.
Okay. That was already a good start. So thanks a lot and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm extremely excited to share our experience on decentralized trials in this open forum. Now, let me first start with explaining what decentralized trials is about, or also called virtual trials, siteless trials, or patient-centric trials. It has many different names. Now, the traditional model is really the sponsor selects multiple sites, and these sites will reach out to their patients in the neighborhood. Interactions between sites and patients are typically done face-to-face at the site, and that's why we call it a site-centric approach, the current approach. Now, in this model, many patients are not able to participate in the trial because they're just not living next door of the site. And also patients, for example, with disabilities, like for example, visual impaired patients, cannot participate because the material, they cannot just read it. Now, with decentralized trials, what the core focus is, this model is completely changed. There are two components, like you can see on that picture at the left side. There is the technology, like telemedicine, wearables, that really makes that many of those activities don't need to be done anymore face-to-face, but they can be done remotely. And next to that, there is also a local care team, which can be the local physician, the local nurses, and so on, that can perform those face-to-face interactions now on behalf of the site. So result is also that much less sites will be involved. It can be one site at a local level, one site at a regional level, global level. So there are many different multiple models possible. Now, this, like you can see at the right side, gives also a lot of benefits. So patient access significantly increased. It's really any patient, irrespective of his location, irrespective of his disability, can participate in a clinical trial. Because like, for example, for visual impaired patients, audio and voice-enabled technologies can be provided so that they can also understand the material and collect their feedback. Patient comfort also significantly increase. No need anymore to travel, wait in waiting rooms, and you most likely have already heard about the white coat syndrome, where patients feel really uncomfortable and stressed in a hospital setting, and which leads to higher parameters and really an incorrect interpretation of their condition. Data access goes also up extremely or increase a lot, because in the current model, physicians really need to base their conclusion on single point evaluations obtained at that moment when they see the patient, which can give an incomplete picture. And also often events are picked up behind the facts or sometimes completely missed if the patient forget to say them. And this all will significantly increase by using, for example, wearables, smart devices, where you can have real continuous flow of data, and also patient safety can significantly improve. Integrity, same thing, huge increase here. No manual errors anymore, no need anymore to put data in many different systems and so on. And lastly, also time to market significantly impact, because recruitment can go faster, less dropouts and so on into it. So I hope this gives a little bit of view of what decentralized trials is about. And please move to the next slide, please. Now, for decentralized trials to really make this a success, we see two key drivers, like you can see on this slide. One is technology, and the other one is partnership. And if I focus now on the technology, you see there a nice house, and that house is also built up in two layers. And it's really the first layer, that's where decentralized trial is coming in a lot. So really about incorporating the clinical trial in the patient's own life. On the upper part, you see some elements there listed, like for example, electronic consenting at home with multimedia so that it's accessible by any device, or also connecting virtually and via secure way. Guidance can also be given via technology, personalized real-time notifications so that patients can exactly at home even be supported in that huge jungle of assessments that they need to do. Using wearables and smart devices to automate and have real data insights of what is happening with the patient. And tracking, also a very important one. So tracking and analysis of data. So because often missing data is a huge issue for clinical trials. And that's really those elements core for decentralized trials, helping that its clinical trial becomes fully embedded in the patient's own life. Now you see also a second layer on that house, and that's really where also within TCS we focus a lot on, and that's really about bringing clinical research to another level, another dimension. Like for example, start using real-time and cognitive analytics of patients' behavior or conditions to prevent that a certain action is occurring. Or start embedding clinical trials in a healthcare environment so that it becomes a very seamless transition from when a patient is in a clinical trial to the healthcare setting. Or also a very important one, start using technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence and so on to automatically analyze that huge amount of structured and unstructured data, often data which goes beyond human capacity to handle, and really start delivering totally novel insights to really augment and bring novel clinical research to the next level. Now, also looking to the right side of the picture, not only technology, partnership is another crucial driver. So a very close collaboration between patients, sites, healthcare providers, digital suppliers, ethics committee, and so on is essential for making decentralized trials a success. Below the picture, you see also everybody is very familiar with that. COVID-19, extremely negative experience, but honestly also brought in that some of those elements here for decentralized trials have moved to the next level. Like, for example, connecting is done virtually because there was a social distancing. Health authorities launched, for example, COVID-19 specific guidelines, which support also several of those technologies. Move to the next slide, and you see also at the bottom there was a reference of an article that I recently also wrote about this topic. Now, clearly many benefits. COVID-19 helped also to move it already a little bit more into the real world. But where are we? Is this now broadly implemented? And for this, let's move to the next slide. Let's take a close look towards some of the pitfalls involved with novel technologies. Because first of all, many product companies have also jumped on those novel technologies which resulted in many novel standalone technologies. So there is really a tsunami of standalone technologies. There is limited framework, limited guidance available on how we need to handle those novel technologies. Timelines are not always clear. Impact on development timelines, submission and approval timelines with those novel technologies. The personal and cultural differences, also a huge item with novel technologies. It's a new way of working. There is a significant shift for all partners, significant investment also of change management that needs to happen with novel technologies. And there is also an unclear return of investment often with novel technologies. It's often also a high investment that you need to do, a lot of indeed change management also, while return of investment often only starts turning up in the implementation phase. Now, if we move to the next slide, let's take also a closer look to for example, the pitfalls in multiple standalone technologies. One is indeed patients are, for example, overloaded with a number of hardware devices, multiple devices, a tablet for this application, a phone for that application, and so on. There are more than 300,000 mobile health apps in our digital store. How can anybody find their way around that? There is also limited standards available. There are device limitations. Device limitations like, for example, the battery shelf life can be a challenge. Or also if you work like, for example, with smart medication packages, you need to take into account the cold chain stored at -80. Electronic technologies don't work at that temperature. Technologies can be immature. The CA certificate is not present for all wearables and so on. And it's also not everywhere, or there are network availabilities, issues or challenges in some countries or in some regions. And if we look towards the next slide, here going indeed a little bit more in depth in the limited guidance, because here also many different elements underneath, where there is not yet much framework available for those novel technologies and to support decentralized trials. There is privacy and GDPR. Guidance, for example, doing the recruitment via social media. What about using medical or laboratory claims and so on into it? Limited regulatory guidance, a core element. Healthcare compliance, also an important item, because when we start moving from those big mega sites supported by local physicians, how does the contracting work with the local physicians? How will the payment will be done? What about the licensed physicians? Environmental impact, also an important factor when moving towards novel technologies, because suddenly we are sitting with chips and batteries, which falls in a totally different domain also about waste and disposal. Here in Europe, for example, you need them to take into account the waste or the directive of the waste of electronic and electronical equipment. Also, impact on the environment itself is of course huge. Import and export requirements, limited framework. And a last one also highlighted their processes and operations with a shift to a few sites. An involvement of technology, The way of monitoring is completely done different. How to build up your team, how to monitor, what to monitor, and so on. So if we move to the next slide, huge amount of pitfalls, but also very important, it's not a mission impossible. So in the next few slides, we will also start sharing now some real guidance and tips on how you can start working around that. So first of all, very, very important, involve your key stakeholders early in the process. Elements like build up a cross-functional team is crucial, and with cross-functional team means also members like privacy, legal, commercial are extremely important. Inform, explain, listen, ask, all elements very important. I remember my former role, for example, also privacy, or when we were working out the e-consent element, that they did say, but we don't want that you do time recording. Okay, then you build something around of it. So then the first screen that the patient was seeing, look, we are going to do time recording. Do you agree or not agree with that? So there are many, many what if questions. Can we do that? What's the business case? So therefore involving very early and building up a very cross-functional team, because many of those questions you can really answer and resolve together or find a way around it. So core element. If you look towards the next slide. Also external stakeholders, extremely important to involve them early in the process. Core for us within TCS is also the user first, and involve all your stakeholders really along the whole process. So start involving them at the design phase, at the development phase, bring in a diverse group of different people together, have hands-on engagements, surveys, workshops. There are so many different formats. And you see here, for example, in the picture, that's about collecting patient feedback in one of our research facilities. And it's something that we standard do for every novel technology. And it's a little bit kind of mimicking your study. So what here we have done was, for example, we bring in the patients the first day, you explain what is expected from them and so on. So you do mimic a kind of initiation visit, and the next day they come back, and then you see how they are, have they understood everything, how they are handling the mobile, did they understood how to use the wearables and so on. So really something which I would strongly recommend to always use. And you see there also the title or the text augment feedback by technology. I'm not a technology person, but also what I have seen, I'm really very impressed with how technology can also improve or help supporting further the feedback of the patient. So if you start using like eye movements, and you can see, okay, the patient, where is he first going to look, what will he act, or with physicians, where do they expect to find the information? It's all so valuable information that can help develop and better design your technologies for the stakeholders for which it is also designed. And on the next slide, here I also included one specific example of an external stakeholder, the health authorities and ethics committee, because I think that's often a stakeholder which is not involved enough in the process, or surely not as early as possible. And while they can really give enormous incremental feedback, like for example, in my former role as Transcelerate e-consent overall lead, I had many interactions, face-to-face engagements and so on, also with health authorities. And they have many questions, they have many concerns, absolutely, but there are also many misunderstandings of what the technology was about or what the expectations were. Like for example, for e-consent, will suddenly patients and site not interact anymore with each other? Totally misunderstandings. And it's really, when you talk with health authorities, inform them and so on, it brings so much value. Because Like as an example, or I put there the FDA guidelines. We had a meeting, or I had a meeting with the FDA. We discussed in detail many elements of e-consent, and then 2 months later, I think also the guidance came out, which included many of the elements that also as a pharma group within Accelerate we had brought together. Same thing like, for example, the one below is an e-consent statement of the MHRA and the HRA. The HRA is maybe not familiar with everybody, but the HRA is an umbrella organization of ethics committees. Also brought their ethics committees in one group of the UK in one room together for a whole workday, going over e-consent, a lot of incredible feedback received, and so on. And a lot of discussions, and a few months later also the statement was published with a lot of information into it, exactly with what we had discussed and informed and yeah, we're handling about. And it's not only at Accelerate level, but also individual interactions with health authority, as I did do also in my former role at Janssen, and where you then draft a briefing book that really say, okay, this is not a mobile medical app because of A, B, C, D, or we collect adverse events via free text field, and these are the responsibility. Anyway, huge impact, and also really big recommendation from myself to really involve early health authorities in the process. And if we go to the next slide then, here also an important slide is about go big, but start small, but not too small. Core recommendation on one hand is build out a comprehensive roadmap and implementation plan, and really get commitment for all phases from the start. So because often, like you see there, initiation visit, implementation visit, scale up phase, often innovation departments are responsible for the initiation phase. Okay, and there you perform the technology, but you don't have any sponsor for leading it towards a scale-up phase. Or there are also not very clear factors for success identified for moving towards one to another phase. And that's really extremely crucial to have that kind of thing built up from the start. Also, novel technologies, decentralized trials, completely novel type of business model. Much more qualitative versus quantitative benefits. Like mentioned, investment, huge investment, return of investment comes much later on. Various pilots models also, like a technical pilot can be done, clinical pilot can be done, technical pilot with internal employees, with healthy volunteers, clinical pilot on a part of the study or on the whole study, many different pilot models. But here also my recommendation would always be don't start too small on one hand. And also decentralized trials is a methodology which doesn't fit, not a one size fit all, because if you go to the ultimate stage of decentralized trials, so really one big site and everything run or managed by technology, that is not applicable for all kinds of study. But I'm fully 100% convinced that many of the technologies and also supporting with the local care is applicable for all clinical trials. And with this, because I have now already talking a lot, I will maybe hand over to my colleague Naru for the next slides. Naru?
Yeah, thanks, Hilde. And moving on to the creation of unified patient and site experience. This, in our experience with the different engagements we have done, is the single most important factor that influences whether or not it gets adopted right and is appreciated by your key stakeholders. For example, it's quite easy to give access to a number of different new tools, new gadgets, new fancy apps to the patients and to the sites. But as we add to that burden, we see tremendous amount of resistance in terms of uptake of these technologies. And a very easy way of avoiding this and enabling the uptake is to make sure that what they see is much simpler. They get a unified experience. For example, the visual that you see on the screen here, it shows how you can combine multiple features from different suppliers into a single app for a study coordinator or a mobile nurse, thereby enabling them to carry out the various activities without having to jump across, open multiple applications, and so on. So this is a very important aspect. And likewise, we see the same problems when we throw a lot of solutions to the patients, assuming they are going to use them, is that unless you give them a unified experience, with time, you would see that they don't understand and they stop using the technology altogether. So this is one key recommendation is think of very simple ways by which you can combine many features from many different suppliers into a single interface for patients, sites, nurses, and so on. Moving to the next slide. Another key aspect is establishing an open ecosystem into which you can plug in different solutions and platforms. For example, on the left-hand side, you can see that it is possible always to have point solutions which are very cool, very exciting, and solve the current problem. But these work well when you are not doing it large scale. When we are talking about large scale, it suddenly adds to a lot of complexity. You find out that you have to integrate one more device. It becomes a project by itself. If you have to validate it for multiple different operating systems, tools that patients use, our sites use, and so on, it becomes a big engagement by itself. So that's where the role of an open ecosystem becomes extremely important. That if we build an open ecosystem in your organizations where you can plug in different providers of different functionalities, and there will never be one. There will be never one solution which will meet a pediatric patient needs, as oncology patient needs, or a particular dermatology needs. So you will always need a mix of solutions, and to enable that, you will always need an open platform into which you can plug in those tools very easily, so that it's not just user-friendly, it's much easier to set up, it is real, can be scaled up, and make it real for a large number of studies. Moving on to the next slide. So what are some of the best practices also from a support ecosystem? So while we talked about what a patient sees, what a study nurse sees, it's also important to look at how you can enable the supporting or the enablement process that enables you to attempt these trials at scale. And the 8 best practices that we have here are: first is develop reusable templates and libraries. They go a long way in terms of making it real for the study teams that you engage with. They know what it looks like, where to start, how to get acceleration and momentum into adoption of the technology for their trials. Building a comprehensive automation strategy is extremely important, especially when you are dealing with a complex world where you will have multiple different devices. You are going to support different bring your own device models, some provision devices, and so on. It's important there is an automation behind it that enables you to test, validate, and make it real across all of those systems. One practice we are following as a TCS is to make it very simple to set up. And we call it a zero programming approach, in which you bring in a new device, you bring a new EQA instrument, you bring in a new set of e-diaries or a measurement or a data collection tool. All of this, do it without making it hard, without making it a big engagement by itself. And that's through a zero programming approach. The 4th best practice is around automation in what a patient sees and the various HA and IRB submissions. So this was also a learning for us in one of our early engagements. We thought that when we were close to making it real, when we thought, yes, we are going to start onboarding patients, we saw there's a huge amount of work required to get the patient-facing content approved. And these kind of things sometimes come as late realizations, but certainly a best practice is make sure you account for all of these activities and automations around them when you try to scale up. Some of the others I'll not call each one of them, but include more configurations, ability to provide site level flexibility, because when we try to roll it out for different countries, different sites, different different choices, that different guidelines that you'll get, you need to be able to accommodate that without disrupting the study onboarding process. And that's where the flexibility is a very important aspect when we're building. And finally, try to do a lot of legwork early on. So if you have a pre-built library of validated devices, validated instruments, it can significantly change how you deploy or how you start decentralized trials. So these are some of the best practices in terms of, apart from making the technology itself or the collaboration ecosystem itself real, on this, from a sponsor point of view, what are the enabling processes you need to set up for such trials? Moving on to the next slide. So next, we'll talk about some real life implementations in terms of how we made it real, what are the learnings we've got, what are the success stories, what works well, what does not work well. So we'll take 3 examples. One in the area of a number of large transformational customers among yourselves who have embarked on digitizing the patient and the site engagement initiatives and making it more possible at home. This is certainly accelerated through COVID. I'll start with that experience first. So the problem statement that we are trying to address, or we have addressed here, is how do you support customers who are doing some or all of the trial procedures at home? And there are different kinds of challenges within that we addressed. First is easy consent, easy use of the procedures at home. And this is something which is a challenge statement in itself, but it can be easily enabled. It's not a difficult one, as long as we factor in the fact that you don't think of it as an electronic system. You don't think of it as a tool. You think of it as an experience for the patients. What can they understand? How to make it simplified? How to make it multimedia enabled? How to make it intuitive? How to make it personalized at a level that they are, what they do, the system reacts to it. It fine tunes to how they behave, how they act, and so on. So this is one of the key aspects that we did for our customers, where when we brought in easy consent at home, we personalized that entire experience, made it very, very intuitive, very easy to use. And also a key learning there was, while doing so, we made sure you support traditional processes, because there will always be exceptions. There will always be need to accommodate that, plan for it. That's one of the things that we did when we brought in this, address this challenge. When we talked about bring your own device, it's again a challenge. When you're doing like at-home trial procedures, there are large array of devices. You don't want to run into $1 million account of doing shipment and provisioning of various kinds of hardware to them. Enabling bring your own device has 2 aspects. The first, which is in today's world, all modern technologies are compatible, are broadly compatible. The second, constraining it with a set of controls. So while you have a large universe, you might not say I'll address 100%. You should be able to constrain it to a narrow set for specific devices, specific instruments, where it's extremely rigorous in terms of the level of validation required. So those are some of the things we did when we built automations. For example, brought in computer vision technologies which can recognize your face, for example, to sign into your mobile device. We use those technologies to see whether what a patient sees is always identical, whether if they use a small device, if they use a high quality device, do they get the same experience, or are they missing out on some things? It's just applying the similar technologies and best practices used for very simple acts which we use every day to solve these business problems. Third is personalize the whole support. So this is another thing that we found is not a difficult challenge, but extremely important, that we tailor the entire support programs for the patients, for the nurses, for the study coordinators in a way that it's aligned to the protocol, but it also gives them a step-by-step direction in terms of what they are supposed to do, and doesn't overwhelm them, because it's very easy to overwhelm people with a lot of information, a lot of tasks, a lot of activities. And I think the personalization aspect here is aimed at bringing a more focused approach in terms of what they should do. So by kind of using some of these best practices, what we have experienced is some good results as well. So for example, ability to roll out studies in matter of days and not weeks and months. Deploying for large number of languages, plus 20 languages, countries for the customers. And it's not always easy to get response to the surveys, to the questionnaires and so on. We are getting more than 90% response rates. And also integrating with a variety of tools. Like, it's not always possible for you to provide all the solution in something you build. You'll have to integrate with the third-party providers. So integration with third-party solutions like a patient transportation solution, which gives them a one-click transportation, doing that. These are some of the highlights that we have seen as well as in this case study. I'll now talk about another different case study, which is in the medication realm. And I think who better than Hilde to talk about it? Hilde, may I request you to talk about the medication related challenges?
Okay, thanks a lot, Naro. Okay, and I think that everybody knows that there are quite some challenges in the supply management domain, and also many key customers have really taken it up to change that. So what I will be talking about this slide is indeed a few key customers, how they have addressed real challenges in medication. Because medication, like for example, 5 to 10% of the inspections findings is around drug accountability. Of also 20 to 25% of all activities happening on site, so the on-site monitoring activities, are related with drug activities. Because in the supply world, still a lot of activities are done on paper. We all are aware also of the multilingual paper booklet label, paper diaries that the patients need to fill in, sites need to fill in 1001 different systems, which leads of course also to a lot of inconsistencies and so on. So there are quite some challenges in the supply world, and also like adherence is another one. Although clinical trial world is an artificial environment sometimes a little bit compared with the real world, so it is much better monitored. But in clinical trials, the dosing regimens are also often much more complex, because in a phase 2 study, you're, for example, looking, okay, what is the best dosing that you need to give? So very complex dosing regimens, making that the patients are lost because of the material provided is also not so easy to understand. So also adherence in clinical trials is a problem. So that are just a few challenges. And at the left side, the picture shows some of the solutions that we had implemented based on also asked of key customers for one or another challenge. And one is, for example, really automating of all kit activities by a scanning device. So that's one which then really support eliminating all kind of kit errors, dispensing errors, and so on, which can occur. Another solution that you see there also is on smart packages itself. And a smart package is a package that registers till the individual unit level. When a patient, for example, removes a pill from a blister or from a bottle or from an inhaler, a certain unit. So that's exactly what the smart package is about. And yeah, we've also included there a digital label picture, because that's also honestly also something very close to my heart, that we can move away from those multilingual complex booklet labels, which are also incomplete and where a patient cannot find this information, and that we start moving towards a digital label. That's really, yeah, I think the way forward. And I still remember even also the pre-ideation workshop that I hosted for Transcelerate, also on e-label domain, to really start moving this element forward. So you see some solutions, and at the right side you really see some key outcomes of customers that have implemented that. Like first one was, for example, with an Alzheimer's study, that two wrong wrong pill intakes were done at home. Now, by using them smart packages, which were used in that case, you can have immediately insight in that intake. So it was also immediately then alerted, because automated alerts them to the physician, and he could also immediately call the patient to re-explain how the intake should be, and so on. So these kind of technologies have a huge impact also on patient safety. With another customer, there we had a more than 90% medication compliance, which even lasted for 6 months in a very elderly patient population in Asia. So it was indeed about where they provided digital labels, support, personalized support linked with medication, like Naru talked also in the previous slide about. So also huge medication compliance increase there. Important, very important, getting away from all those manual actions, activities, double data entries, inconsistencies, errors, and so on. We also realized up to 80% reduction in the drug monitoring efforts and tracking on site. And also very important one, linked with the kit tracking, that for one customer, by implementing it, and also the kit tracking is fully integrated with systems like IRT and so on, that we picked up nearly 10 kit errors, assignment errors per month. And that assignment error could be that the site had entered, for example, the wrong number, or things like that, or IRT assigned, and IRT is the RTSM system, assigned a kit which needed to be in quarantine, or a kit which was damaged. So a total of 10 kits, and even plus 10 kit errors, were picked up by incorporating the scanning technology in the solution. And core for us, or the statement there below, is absolutely about the right kit to the right patient at the right site. And maybe a last note also, also very important, that goes also towards that embed that I indicated on the first slide. Here also on smart packages, having that link to the commercial domain is extremely important, because here it doesn't make sense to give a lot of technologies and support and so on in a clinical trial domain. Ensure also that once it becomes commercially available up the market, that patient can get a similar kind of support, for example, with digital label technologies. Okay, over to you again, Naru.
Yeah, thank you, Hilde. Okay, the third case study is around customers who are deploying smart devices, digital biomarkers, and testing them out, which will make this whole next generation trials real. So what are the key challenges we have addressed in this space? Starting from the left, the first one is where we wanted to monitor COPD patients at home by giving them a device which was all available, but enabling them through guidance, through notifications, and tracking their usage of the device and their health conditions through that. The second is where, going to the top, there are a number of efforts currently in progress to develop new novel digital biomarkers. And for example, at the top, you see some novel biomarkers which are being developed by us in collaboration with the academic institutions, which are more in the area of Parkinson's disease through to measure gait imbalance. for Parkinson's disease and use it through something which is simpler than a set of multiple devices, which is what is used today, where you have a belt, something on the shoe, a brace, and so on. But making the technology novel by getting some patterns, which is a double sinusoid, which says whether there's a gate imbalance, whether there is no gate imbalance, helps you detect that with causing less inconvenience to the patients. So there are companies which are testing such algorithms. There are many research institutions in the hospitals which are developing very novel, very cool tech stuff. But they all have the problem of how do we test it out? How do we make it real? So that's where a platform, the challenge we are trying to address there is give them a platform on which they can do the data acquisition, the visualizations, testing, collect the data points, do the analysis, and use it for taking it further. And the challenge statement at the bottom is around supporting elderly patients at home. So it's not just in a clinical trial setting, but doing multi-activity thing for elderly people at home in a home care setting where you want real time, but something which is not very intrusive method to make sure they are safe, they are not immobile, they have not fallen, and so on. So while there are many commercial applications of that, the whole challenge here was to do it in a way where somebody does not need to do something special. You don't need to always wear a watch. You don't need to always wear a particular shoe and things like that. And this is where we collaborated with the Singapore Management University to come up with a multi-activity tracking mechanism and some algorithms, which we developed specifically based on non-intrusive sensors to make sure the people at home are safe, and also we can track their wellness with specific indications, specific measurements which comes from various devices. So there are a huge set of such engagements which are going on right now for various customers. What we are enabling them with is a platform approach where you do not need to kind of start from scratch every time you come up with a new tool, new technology, new algorithm, new device that you want to set up and that you want to validate. So that's where we are coming in helping them. And this includes some use cases and some highlights, such as the real-time non-intrusive tracking of elderly people. We are working on a CAD and cardiac fatigue biomarker, which is yet to be approved biomarker, but it has to be validated and needs to undergo all those validation stages, where we are running trials with 1,000 around patients in a healthcare setup. And also we have found a lot of close correlation. Coming back to the COPD monitoring, we have seen close correlation between what the device measures and the clinical findings. So these are also the kind of data points which are quite useful to substantiate the use of these digital tools as a replacement of the conventional COA and conventional instruments. Moving on. So here is a summary of some of our learnings based on the various stakeholder feedback that we've got. And what are the things we have heard back from the patients or the voice of the patients? One is that if there is limited valuable feature, we see it directly that it's not adopted enough. So there should be enough value for the patients if you want it. For example, these learnings came from some of the trials where we had very less of informational content available to the patients. The study teams thought it's useful. Some of the early site engagement thought it is useful, but when we went out to the patients, they were like, okay, if this is what I get, why should I take the pain of using another technology for that? So it's important that you start small, but don't start something which is not valuable enough for patients. Second is provide options. It's never like use my device or not use my device. You have to give the options where they have a device provisioned to them or they have their own device. That's the best method that we've seen so far in terms of patient engagement. And the third, which I already mentioned, is always plan for backup. It's something you need to be careful about. It's not like that becomes the norm, but always plan for backups which support the traditional processes, the traditional paper processes, and supports that very well. I think that's also a key thing. In terms of the sites, I think we always hear a lot of feedback from them. But if we have to summarize, what does it mean for us? It is, don't duplicate data across systems. We've got some very good examples where the uptake was very, very low and the feedback was, we don't want to use it, mainly because we do the same thing in another system. Now, even if it's adding a lot of value, if you do a part of the thing twice, you are adding to the site burden. So don't duplicate data. Complement their healthcare setup. Don't create new novel tools which do in part what the healthcare tools already do. Don't redo the calendars. Don't redo the visit reminders. That's already there if for a healthcare provider. If it's not there, absolutely you must do it. But complement them rather than always give them multiple tools. Reduce the hardware clutter. And when it comes to system interfaces, another key learning is many of these are very, very time critical. If you are asking somebody to wait 10 minutes for the data to populate into your system, they are not going to wait for it. So those are some of the key learnings that we've got. And in terms of study team engagement, is important, as Hilde mentioned. Start the engagement with the broader stakeholder group early, engage a lot, develop reusable assets, do the support ecosystem well if you want to scale out your solutions for a large number of trials. Build the automations for setup, for validations, for ethics submissions, and so on. This is all what we have learned so far. I think these are some of the best practices that we have also built over a period of time and enabling our customers to kind of make the leap from one-off trials to a large-scale platform for doing multiple trials in this model. Finally, to summarize, some of the key takeaways that you would like to highlight: communicate early, communicate with a broad variety of stakeholders. It's never over communication. Engage them early along the way, validate it with them, engage with real patients, engage with real sites, get real direct first-hand feedback. There is no alternative to that. You have to invest in easy-to-use material and give adequate support. Do it upfront so that at the last moment we don't find wanting in terms of those materials which can really drive the change. Change management, absolutely the most important aspect. It cannot be underestimated. And finally, transformation, it requires time. We have to give it enough time. There will be failures. It's really important to fail early, fail fast, and make sure that we learn from that and go on to the next stage. Those are some of the key takeaways from our meeting. With that, Vikram, I hand it over back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hilde and Naru, for such a wonderful and refreshing perspective. And I'm really amazed with the limitless possibilities with decentralized trials. I am positive that our audience really benefited from the valuable inputs and examples shared during the course of the session. In case anyone is interested to obtain more insights into the TCS ADD capabilities for decentralized trials, feel free to reach either Naru or Hilde. We'll be more than happy to help. I've also listed down their email addresses on the slide for your reference, so you may note it down if you are interested to talk to them separately. So this leaves us with, I guess, 5 minutes to take up questions. There are quite a few incoming queries that I was looking at. So folks, please bear with us if you're not able to answer your question during the session. As mentioned earlier, we shall respond to all received inquiries and email it to everyone for your benefit. So let me take the first one. This looks like an interesting question. Yeah, so thanks for this extremely thorough session. I too completely agree with your perspective that clinical and commercial should be closer and brought together. Can you share your guidance or expertise in that domain? So Hilde, would you mind taking this?
Okay, yeah, that's indeed a very, very nice question. Now, yeah, if I can share a little bit of my own expertise onto that, yeah, and like I already mentioned, this is about your cross-functional team building up and where it's so important to have all key players involved and not only think about clinical, but also involve commercial into it. So one of the team members that I always included was commercial, and they were then involved in all steps, like for example in the requirement setting they were involved, but also if for example for specific developments like for smart packages, then making sure that it was that clinical packaging engineers and commercial packaging engineers were also very closely collaborating with each other, and that things like which chip, which technology, which battery, and so on, that it was exactly the same used, and that even the same validation test could be done. So it's often all about bringing partners much closer together, and also and that's not only on internal level engagement, but I remember also external engagements when we were doing that. Although you go, for example, towards health authority with a package on your clinical trial, then I always also included at least one section at the end, for example, to also address the commercial perspective, or address how are they thinking about when, for example, digital label to implement it on the commercial level, and whether health authorities had any concerns onto that level. So it's a lot for. I truly believe that they should be much more closer brought together, embedding both into it, because it benefits a lot the patient, the whole pathway, and not only in the clinical trial. And a lot is to do with partnerships and collaborations.
Great, thanks, Hilde. I hope that the question was ably answered. Going to the next question, this one about integration. Yeah, the speakers talked about integration with healthcare systems. How can one do this, and have you got any experience with this? What are the key things to watch out for? Naru, over to you. You may want to answer this.
Yes, Vikram, and I might like to actually also include a question on increase, another related question around drug accountability. Maybe I can combine both of them because it's related.
Yeah.
So in terms of integration with healthcare system, we have experience where we see that some large research institutions, they have their own tools for drug accountability and doing all these returns automatically. So we have experience in not just providing our own solution, but also see how we can integrate with those solutions which are available in the healthcare setup, thereby avoiding the pain for those users to have to use multiple tools to do the same purpose. So integrating healthcare systems with drug accountability tools which can do activities such as automated pill count at the point of return, create automated drug destruction reports which can be e-signed, create enable remote accountability of investigational product without having to do site visits. So those are some of the key capabilities that we enable. But this is also available in healthcare setup in some of the healthcare setups, and there we also integrate with them so that it becomes a seamless experience for them.
Thanks, Naru. We have time for just one more question now, and I'll pose this to you, Hilde. We have the question is about e-consent. We have talked about e-consent, but it is now being globally accepted, as I believe that in some regions such as Europe, there are still concerns around electronic signature. So yeah, some privacy related questions. So Hilde, can you possibly answer this?
Okay, thanks. And also a very relevant question. And yeah, it's right that with novel technologies, there are also differences between how local or regional health authorities, how they stand across a novel technology. And here also, coming towards partnership is extremely important, and with specifically now on the question on e-consent and Europe. I remember indeed when I presented also to the inspection working group of EMA with the 50 inspectors, that there were quite some key elements where they had issues about. They were also overall very positive on e-consent, but there were items like the site burden, how is that involving? They had also, I remember, still a big question, involve us early in the process, very important. And then their number one, which is linked, I think, with the question also a little bit on the signature. They had a huge question about patient data, because I still remember a core for them was, look, patient data should never leave the site unless under the management and oversight of the investigator. So that's the core item, and where also the struggles for e-signature in Europe are a little bit sitting underneath. And where I think really a partnership or a collaboration and discussion again with the EMA is needed. Because I also still remember that I also at that moment did say, yeah, but or their perspective is that an investigator then should always set up, for example, the contract with each e-consent supplier, because he's responsible for the UAT, he's responsible for the contract, and so on and so on. Now, this is of course a very difficult way to work, because that would lead towards a totally non-harmonized approach for patients. Some patients will have then e-consent, others not, and very different tools that is used. So it's fully right, it's globally accepted, but in some regions the e-signature is still a concern. With COVID-19, there has been a little bit relief into it under these conditions, but to really resolve it completely, we should more partner. And that's also something where I'm really looking towards how can we start up maybe again an e-consent consortium to help moving this a little bit forward.
Thanks, Hilde. And I'm so sorry, everyone. We would need to end this virtual event now. We have just run out of time. Just a reminder that we would be sending out a feedback survey email to everyone, and we'd appreciate your inputs. Thanks, everyone, for joining this session, and we look forward to having you guys in our subsequent events as well. Take care and have a good day.